In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, a florist is found strangled in her greenhouse, a clematis vine knotted around her throat. Miss Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of secrets, blackmail, debts, and hidden grudges. For suspects, loyal assistant, a desperate niece, a guarded supplier, and a wealthy customer each hide truths, but only one wielded the vine. Dive into a tale of deception where flowers mask danger and a single clue blooms into justice. Chapter 1: The Greenhouse Tragedy. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking with the steady rhythm of a metronome. The village was quiet, save for the distant hum of bees and the occasional clatter of a milk cart. Miss Marple, her white hair neatly pinned and her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, was halfway through a skein of pale blue wool when Janet, her maid, burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with the urgency of fresh gossip. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful," Janet exclaimed, wringing her hands. "Clara Thornby's been found dead in her greenhouse, strangled with a vine, they say. The police are there now, and the whole village is talking." Miss Marple's needles paused just for a moment as she absorbed the news. Clara Thornby, the florist, was a familiar figure in St. Mary Mead. Her shop a burst of colour on the high street, its windows brimming with roses, lilies, and delicate ferns, strangled with a vine. The image was both grotesque and intriguing, stirring memories of village scandals, past a farmer's wife smothered in her own shawl, a curate poisoned by his own communion wine. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind already turning. "When did this happen, Janet?" she asked, her voice calm but probing. "Late yesterday, they reckoned," Janet replied, eager to share. "Mrs. Hale, her neighbour, saw the police arrive at dawn. They're saying it's murder, miss. A proper murder." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. "I think I shall take a walk to the shop," she said, reaching for her hat, a sensible straw affair with a single ribbon. Fresh air does wonders for clarity of thought. The walk to Clara's shop was a short one, past the vicarage with its sagging rose trellis and the post office where villagers lingered, their whispers forming a soft chorus of speculation. The shop itself, Thornby's Blooms, stood at the village's edge, its greenhouse glinting in the morning light like a jewel box. A small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, clutching her shawl, young Tommy from the butcher's, gawking openly, and a few others, their faces a mix of shock and curiosity. Miss Marple slipped through them, her unassuming presence barely noticed, and approached the greenhouse door where Inspector Craddock stood, his notebook in hand. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Craddock said, tipping his hat. He was a young man for an inspector, with a square jaw and a manner that suggested he valued Miss Marple's insights, though he'd never admit it outright. "I suppose you've heard." "Indeed, Inspector," she replied, her eyes scanning the scene. "A terrible thing, may I?" She gestured toward the greenhouse, and Craddock, with a resigned sigh, stepped aside. He knew better than to bar her way. Inside, the air was humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Clara Thornby lay near a workbench, a sheet now covering her, but the shape of her body was unmistakable. A coil of clematis vine, thick and green, lay discarded nearby, its ends frayed where it had been cut and knotted. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it, noting its strength strong enough to strangle, certainly, but requiring a firm hand to wield. The workbench was strewn with petals, as if a bouquet had been torn apart in haste, and a single muddy footprint, size 9 perhaps, marked the packed earth floor near the door. A pair of shears, glinting dully, rested on a nearby shelf. "Nasty business," Craddock said, joining her. "Dr. Haydock puts the time of death around 6 yesterday evening. No sign of forced entry, so she likely knew her killer. We've 4 people who were here yesterday: Lily Meadows, her assistant; Arthur Grayson, a regular customer; Mr. Harrow, her flower supplier; and Sophie Thornby, her niece from London." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the names. Lily, a timid girl, who arranged flowers with a delicate touch; Grayson, a widower with a temper; Harrow, a man whose deliveries were as regular as the church bell; and Sophie, a newcomer whose arrival had stirred whispers. "And what do they say?" she asked, bending slightly to examine a crushed daisy near the footprint. "Lily claims she left at 5, Grayson says 4, Harrow was here at 3, and Sophie says she was with Clara until 5:30. We're checking their stories now." Craddock's tone was brisk, but Miss Marple detected a hint of frustration. For suspects, for alibis, and a village full of secrets. She straightened, her eyes drifting to the greenhouse's glass walls. "Streaked with condensation. Clara was well liked, I presume?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Clara had been a fixture in St. Mary Mead, her shop a haven for brides and mourners alike. Yet no one was without enemies, not even a florist, mostly. Craddock said, though Mrs. Hale mentioned Clara had words with Grayson over unpaid bills, and Harrow wasn't pleased when she rejected some of his flowers last month. Miss Marple's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "People do reveal themselves in their quarrels," she murmured, thinking of a St. Mary Mead spinster who'd once quarrelled over a misdelivered letter, only for it to unmask a theft. She took a final look at the scene, the vine, the footprint, the scattered petals, and stepped outside, her mind already weaving connections as she walked home. The village seemed to close ranks around its tragedy, curtains twitching as she passed. Miss Marple knew St. Mary Mead too well to believe in simple crimes. A vine was no ordinary weapon. It suggested intent, perhaps even symbolism. Clara's death was no impulse, but a plan, and Miss Marple intended to unravel it, one quiet observation at a time. Chapter 2. The assistant's tale. The late morning sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobbled path leading to the village police station, a modest brick building with ivy creeping up its walls. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, walked with measured steps, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. The news of Clara Thornby's murder had spread like wildfire through the village, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human nature, felt compelled to observe the first formal questioning of the suspects. Inspector Craddock had reluctantly agreed to her presence, knowing her knack for noticing what others overlooked, though he masked his concession with a gruff remark about keeping out of the way. Inside the station, the air was stale, with the scent of ink and old wood. Lily Meadows, Clara's young assistant, sat in a hard-backed chair in the interview room, her hands twisting in her lap. She was a slight girl, no more than 22, with mousy brown hair pinned haphazardly and eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her apron, still dusted with potting soil, hung loosely over a faded blue dress, and her fingers bore the telltale stains of greenhouse work, dark earth under her nails, a faint green smudge on her thumb. Miss Marple settled into a corner chair, her needles clicking softly as she began a new row of her pale blue scarf. her presence so unobtrusive that Lily barely glanced her way. Inspector Craddock, seated across from Lily, opened his notebook with a deliberate snap. "Miss Meadows," he began, his tone firm but not unkind, "you were at the shop yesterday, working with Miss Thornby. Tell us exactly what happened, from the moment you arrived until you left." Lily's lips trembled, and she pressed a handkerchief to her mouth before speaking. "I got to the shop at 8, same as always," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Thornby was already there, sorting peonies for Mrs. Price's tea party. We worked all day, arranging orders, watering the plants in the greenhouse. It was busy, with the wedding order for the vicar's niece coming up. I left at 5, like I told you. Clara was still in the greenhouse, working on a bouquet of lilies she was humming, happy as anything. I never thought." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in the handkerchief. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a fraction of a second, as she studied Lily's hunched shoulders. The girl's grief seemed genuine, but Miss Marple had seen enough of St. Mary Mead's dramas to know that tears could mask more than sorrow. She recalled a young housemaid, years ago, who wept copiously for her employer's stolen silver, only to be found later with the spoons hidden in her mattress. Grief, Miss Marple knew, was no proof of innocence. Craddock leaned forward, his pen poised. "And you saw no one else at the shop that afternoon? No visitors, no customers?" Lily hesitated, her eyes darting to the side before returning to Craddock. "Well, there was Mr. Grayson, of course. He came in around 3, wanting roses again. He's always buying roses, says they're for his wife's grave. But—" she trailed off, biting her lip. "But what, Miss Meadows?" Craddock pressed, his voice sharpening. Lily flushed, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "He and Clara had a row. Not loud, mind you, but sharp. Something about an unpaid bill. Clara said he owed her 4 months of orders, and he got cross, said she was overcharging. He left in a huff, slamming the door." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind filing away the detail. Arthur Grayson, a widower with a temper, was a familiar figure in the village, his grand house on the hill a testament to wealth but not to contentment. She made a mental note to inquire further about his roses and his debts. "And after Mr. Grayson," Craddock asked, "anyone else?" Lily nodded slowly. "Mr. Harrow came by with a delivery, around 3:30, I think. He brought a crate of carnations and some of that clematis vine Clara loved. He didn't stay long, just unloaded and left. Said he had other deliveries. And then Sophie, Miss Thornby's niece, came in about 4. She and Clara went to the back office for a bit, talking. I didn't hear what about, but Sophie looked upset when she came out. Miss Marple's eyes, half hidden behind her spectacles, sharpened. Sophie Thornby, the niece from London, was a newcomer to St. Mary Mead, her arrival stirring whispers of family tensions. The office conversation suggested private matters, perhaps money, perhaps something deeper. Miss Marple thought of a cousin in her own village who'd once arrived unannounced, claiming affection but seeking an inheritance. Family, she knew, could be as dangerous as strangers. Craddock scribbled a note, then fixed Lily with a steady gaze. "And you're certain you left at 5? No one else was there when you locked up?" "Yes, sir," Lily said, her voice firmer now. "I locked the front door myself, and Clara was in the greenhouse. She said she'd finish the lilies and lock the back. I went home to my mum's, had supper, and went to bed. I didn't know anything was wrong until—" She choked back a sob, her hands trembling again. Miss Marple watched closely, noting the dirt under Lily's nails, the faint tremor in her fingers. The girl's story was consistent, but consistency was no guarantee of truth. She recalled a gardener's boy in St. Mary Mead who'd sworn he'd left his employer's shed at dusk, only to be caught later with a stolen rake. Lily's hands, stained with earth, suggested she'd been deep in the greenhouse's soil, perhaps tending plants, perhaps covering her tracks. Craddock closed his notebook, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Miss Meadows. You'll stay in the village, won't you? We may need to speak again." Lily nodded, rising unsteadily. As she passed Miss Marple, their eyes met briefly, and Miss Marple offered a gentle smile. "You were fond of Clara, weren't you?" she asked softly, her tone that of a kindly aunt. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She was good to me," she whispered. "Took me on when no one else would. Taught me everything about flowers. I'd never hurt her, never." She hurried out, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Miss Marple remained seated, her knitting steady as she turned the conversation over in her mind. Lily's devotion to Clara seemed heartfelt, but devotion could curdle into resentment under the right pressures. Had Clara been too demanding? Had Lily harbored a grudge, hidden behind her timid demeanor? Miss Marple thought of the clematis vine, its strength requiring a determined grip. Lily's slight frame seemed ill-suited to such a task. But determination, Miss Marple knew, could outweigh physical strength. She rose, tucking her knitting into her bag, and stepped outside to find Craddock lighting a cigarette. "What do you make of her, Miss Marple?" he asked, exhaling a plume of smoke. "A sweet girl, on the surface," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. "But surfaces can deceive, Inspector. Her hands, did you notice the soil? She's been working in that greenhouse, perhaps more than—" "She lets on," Craddock frowned, glancing at his notes. "You think she's hiding something?" "I think," Miss Marple said, adjusting her hat, "that everyone hides something, even if it's only from themselves. Lily's grief is real, but grief can coexist with guilt. I'd like to know more about her movements after 5 and about that row with Mr. Grayson." Craddock nodded, stubbing out his cigarette. "We'll check her alibi. Her mother's house is just down the lane from the shop. Easy enough to slip back, if she had a mind to." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind drifting to a St. Mary Mead seamstress who'd slipped back to her employer's shop to retrieve a forgotten shawl and found herself embroiled in a theft. "People do return to places they shouldn't," she murmured. "Now, Inspector, might I have a word with Mrs. Hale, Clara's neighbor? She has a keen eye for comings and goings." Craddock sighed, knowing resistance was futile. "Very well, Miss Marple, but don't go stirring up the village. Just yet." "I wouldn't dream of it," she replied, her eyes twinkling with the quiet resolve of one who had stirred up many a village, and solved their mysteries in the process. Miss Marple made her way to Mrs. Hale's cottage, a tidy affair with geraniums in the window boxes and a view of Clara's shop across the lane. Mrs. Hale, a stout woman with a penchant for gossip, welcomed her with a pot of tea and a torrent of observations. "I saw Lily leave at 5, just as she said," Mrs. Hale declared, pouring tea into chipped china cups. "But she looked hurried, not her usual self. And then there was Mr. Grayson, lingering by the shop later, near 6. He didn't go in. Mind you, just stood by the gate, looking cross." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing the timeline. Grayson's presence at 6, if true, contradicted his claim of leaving at 4, and Lily's hurried departure suggested more than a simple end to the workday. "Did you see anyone else, Mrs. Hale?" she asked, her tone casual. "Well, there was Sophie, coming out just before Lily, maybe 10 minutes to 5. She had a face like thunder, as if she and Clara had quarreled. And Mr. Harrow's van was there earlier, but I didn't see him leave. Mind you, I was in my kitchen most of the evening, so I might have missed something." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the greenhouse's muddy footprint. Mrs. Hale's account placed all 4 suspects near the shop, but only Grayson's later appearance raised questions. She thanked Mrs. Hale and walked home, the village settling into its midday hush. At her cottage, she settled by the window. Her knitting resumed as she pondered Lily's tale. Lily's story held together, but its edges frayed under scrutiny. Her devotion to Clara, her knowledge of the greenhouse, her stained hands all pointed to opportunity, if not motive. The row with Grayson suggested tensions in the shop, and Sophie's upset hinted at family discord. Harrow's delivery, with its clematis vine, was too convenient to ignore. Miss Marple's mind drifted to a St. Mary Mead baker's apprentice who'd seemed loyal until a stolen recipe revealed his betrayal. Loyalty, she knew, could be a mask. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple made a mental note to visit the shop. Again, to examine the greenhouse's layout and the vine's placement. Something in Lily's hesitation, in the dirt under her nails, lingered in her thoughts. The truth, she felt, lay not in grand gestures, but in small details, the kind only a village spinster, with her quiet ways and sharp eyes, could uncover. Chapter 3. The customer's complaint. The afternoon light softened over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of gold and shadow as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the vicarage, her steps measured and her mind alert. Her knitting bag, ever present, swung gently at her side, the faint clink of needles a counterpoint to the chirping of sparrows. The vicarage, with its sagging rose trellis and ivy-clad walls, was a hub of village gossip. And Miss Marple knew that Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, would have much to say about Clara Thornby's murder. The news of Arthur Grayson's heated exchange with Clara, as relayed by Lily Meadows, had piqued Miss Marple's curiosity, and she intended to learn more about the widower whose roses were a village fixture. Mrs. Price welcomed her with a flutter of excitement, her round face alight with the thrill of tragedy. "Oh, Miss Marple, isn't it dreadful?" she exclaimed, ushering her into the parlour where a tray of tea and scones awaited. Poor Clara, strangled in her own greenhouse, and with a vine, of all things. The vicar says it's like something from a Greek tragedy, though I dare say it's more like one of those dreadful novels from the lending library. Miss Marple smiled faintly, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "A tragedy indeed," she murmured, accepting a cup of tea. "I understand Mr. Grayson was at the shop yesterday. He's a regular customer, isn't he?" Mrs. Price's eyes widened, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh yes, always buying roses, though I've my doubts about where they go. His wife's been dead these 5 years, and yet he's at Clara's shop every week, ordering bouquets. Last Thursday, I saw him myself, red in the face, shouting at Clara about overpriced flowers. He said she was fleecing him, and she gave as good as she got, told him to pay his bills or take his business elsewhere." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind turning over the detail. A public quarrel suggested more than a simple dispute over money. She recalled a St. Mary Mead grocer who'd argued with a customer over a bill, only for it to mask a deeper grudge involving a jilted fiancé. Was there anyone else about during their argument? She asked, her tone mild. Mrs. Price leaned forward, eager to share. Only Lily, I think, arranging tulips in the window. But I heard from Mrs. Hale that Grayson was seen near the shop again later, around 6, just standing by the gate, looking furtive. And you know what they say about him, too much money and not enough sense. I wouldn't be surprised if he's hiding something. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the vicarage's rose garden, where petals littered the path. Grayson's wealth was well known, his grand house on the hill a stark contrast to Clara's modest shop. Yet wealth, she knew, often bred secrets, and secrets could lead to violence. She thanked Mrs. Price and, declining another scone, set off for Grayson's estate. Determined to see the man himself, the walk to Grayson's house took her past the village green, where children played, and old Mr. Tuttle swept his shop's doorstep, casting curious glances her way. The Grayson estate, a Georgian pile with overgrown hedges and a neglected fountain, loomed at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its grandeur faded but imposing. Miss Marple rang the bell, and a housekeeper, a dear woman named Mrs. Finch, admitted her. With a frown, "Mr. Grayson's in the study," she said, "but he's not in a mood for visitors." "I shan't take long," Miss Marple replied, her gentle demeanour disarming the housekeeper's objections. She was shown into a study, lined with dusty books and heavy curtains, where Arthur Grayson sat at a desk, a glass of brandy in hand despite the hour. He was a florid man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a mane of greying hair and eyes that narrowed at her entrance. "Miss Marple," he said, rising with a grudging nod, "I suppose you're here about Clara. The police have already been asking their questions. I've nothing to hide." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "I'm sure you haven't, Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice soft but probing. "But I understand you and Clara had a disagreement yesterday. Over a bill, was it?" Grayson's jaw tightened, and he took a sip of brandy before answering. "She was charging me a fortune for those roses. Every week another bouquet, and her prices kept creeping up. I told her it was daylight robbery, and she had the nerve to say I could afford it. I left at 4, and that was that." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes never leaving his face. "And you didn't return later?" "Mrs. Hale mentioned seeing you near the shop around 6. Grayson's hand paused, the brandy glass hovering. "Mrs. Hale's mistaken," he said sharply. "I was here, at home, having dinner. Ask Mrs. Finch. I had no reason to go back." His tone was defiant, but Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tightening of his fingers on the glass. She changed tack, her voice as gentle as ever. "You bought roses for your late wife's grave, I believe." A touching gesture. Grayson nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Mary loved roses. White ones, always. I keep her memory alive that way." Miss Marple inclined her head, her mind racing. The roses were a plausible excuse, but their frequency weekly for 5 years seemed excessive, even for devotion. She recalled a St. Mary Mead widower who'd bought flowers for a sister who turned out to be a mistress. Were Grayson's roses truly for a grave, or did they mask another purpose? She rose, thanking him for his time, and noted his polished shoes and pristine cuffs as she left. No mud, she thought, recalling the greenhouse's muddy footprint. Yet Grayson's estate had plenty of muddy paths, and his boots, no doubt, were kept elsewhere. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped by the post office, where Miss Hartnell, the postmistress, was sorting letters with a keen eye for news. Mr. Grayson's been quiet lately, Miss Hartnell offered, unprompted. But I saw him at Clara's shop last week, carrying a parcel, not just flowers. Looked secretive, if you ask me. Ms. Marple's interest sharpened. A parcel suggested more than a simple purchase. She thanked Miss Hartnell and made her way to Clara's shop, where Inspector Craddock was overseeing a constable's search. Of the premises, the shop was closed, its windows dark, but the greenhouse door stood ajar, and Miss Marple slipped inside, her eyes scanning the scene anew. The clematis vine, now bagged as evidence, had been replaced by a faint outline on the workbench where it had lain. The muddy footprint, still visible, was a man's size, too large for Lily or Sophie, but plausible for Grayson or Harrow. Miss Marple knelt, examining the scattered petals roses, not lilies, despite Lily's claim that Clara was working on a wedding bouquet. A discrepancy, she thought, however small. She noticed a small, overlooked detail, a single white rose. Petal, caught in a crack in the workbench, its edges slightly wilted. White roses, like Grayson's. She straightened as Craddock approached, his notebook in hand. "Found anything, Miss Marple?" he asked, half teasing. "Only a petal," she replied, pointing to the workbench. "But it's curious, don't you think, that Clara was arranging lilies, yet we find a rose here?" Craddock frowned, jotting a note. Could have been from earlier. Grayson's always buying roses. "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral, but petals don't linger long in a busy greenhouse. And Mr. Grayson's alibius, Mrs. Finch, confirmed it. Craddock shook his head. "She says he was home by 5, but she was in the kitchen most of the evening. Can't swear. He didn't step out." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Grayson's temper, his secretive parcel, his lingering near the shop. The roses, she suspected, were a key, but to what? A debt, a deception, or something darker? She thought of a St. Mary Mead merchant who'd used regular deliveries to conceal smuggled goods. Grayson's wealth could afford many things, but silence, she knew, came at a higher price. As she left the greenhouse, the village settling into its evening calm, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening. Grayson's quarrel with Clara, his shaky alibi, and the white rose petal pointed to a man with secrets. But the muddy footprint, the vine's deliberate cut, suggested calculation beyond a mere outburst. She resolved to speak with Harrow next, and perhaps Sophie, to untangle the web of motives that bound Clara's final hours. For now, she walked home, her knitting bag at her side, her mind as sharp as the shears that had severed the fatal vine. Chapter 4. The supplier's shadow. The early evening draped St. Mary Mead in a soft haze, the air cool and fragrant with the scent of late summer blooms. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat exchanged for a light shawl, walked the winding lane toward Harrow's nursery, a sprawling patch of green just beyond the village's edge. Her knitting bag, as ever, hung from her arm, its contents a quiet comfort as her mind sifted through the threads of Clara Thornby's murder, the clematis vine, the muddy footprint, and Arthur Grayson's dubious alibi lingered in her thoughts. But now her attention turned to Mr. Harrow, the flower supplier whose deliveries had brought him to Clara's shop on the day of her death. His van's muddy tires, matching the greenhouse footprint, were a detail too pointed to ignore. Harrow's nursery was a patchwork of glass houses and open beds, its rows of carnations, dahlias, and trellised vines a testament to careful cultivation. The man himself, Ernest Harrow, was wiry and weathered, his face lined from years under the sun. He was unloading a crate of marigolds when Miss Marple approached, her unassuming figure drawing only a cursory glance. "Good evening, Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice gentle as a breeze. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Harrow set the crate down, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" he said, his tone guarded but civil. "Heard about Clara, I suppose." "Terrible thing. What brings you here?" "A little curiosity," she replied, her eyes scanning the nursery. A clematis vine, identical to the one used in the murder, climbed a nearby trellis, its leaves glossy in the fading light. "You supplied Clara's shop, I understand. I wondered if you might share your recollections of yesterday." Harrow's jaw tightened, but he nodded, leading her to a small office cluttered with seed packets and ledgers. "I delivered at 3, he said, leaning against a desk. "Carnations, some roses, and that clematis she liked. Dropped the lot in the greenhouse, spoke to Clara for a minute, and left. Had other stops to make." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite interest. "And how was Clara? In good spirits?" Harrow shrugged, his eyes flicking to the window. "Same as always. Busy, a bit sharp. She'd been particular lately, rejecting a batch of orchids last month. Said they were wilted, though they were fine. Cost me a fair bit, that did." Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their soft clicking. "A disagreement, then?" she asked, her tone mild. She recalled a St. Mary Mead butcher who'd lost a customer over spoiled meat, only for it to mask a deeper feud, involving a shared fence. Business disputes, she knew, could fester into something uglier. "It wasn't a row," Harrow said quickly. "Just business. She paid on time, mostly, and I kept delivering. No bad blood." His fingers drummed on the desk, betraying a restlessness that Miss Marple noted. "And you left straight after the delivery." She pressed her eyes on the clematis outside. "No reason to linger." Harrow's gaze hardened. "I was in and out. My assistant, Tom, can vouch for me. We were at the next village by 4. He gestured to a logbook on the desk. "It's all written down times, deliveries, everything." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes drifting to the logbook. "How thorough," she said. "Might I take it?" "Look, I do admire a well-kept record." Harrow hesitated, then slid the book toward her. The entries were meticulous, listing deliveries to Clara's shop at 3 o'clock, with a note of clematis special order. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a smudge on the page, as if a time had been altered. She made no comment, merely nodding as she returned the book. As they stepped outside, she paused by a locked shed near the greenhouse, its door weathered but sturdy. A faint scent of clematis wafted from within, and she recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener who'd hidden stolen tools in a similar shed, his secrecy betraying his guilt. "What do you keep in there, Mr. Harrow?" she asked, her tone as innocent as a child's pesticides. "Tools, nothing special," he replied, too quickly. "Keeps the lads from nicking things." He shifted his weight, his eyes avoiding hers. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the locked shed, the smudged logbook, the muddy tires. She thanked Harrow and began her walk back to the village, the nursery's green expanse fading behind. The evening was quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog and the rustle of leaves. At the village pub, the Blue Boar, she paused, knowing it was a wellspring of gossip. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and ale, and she spotted Tom, Harrow's assistant, nursing a pint in a corner, approaching with her usual tact. Miss Marple struck up a conversation, her questions veiled in neighbourly concern. A sad day for Clara Thornby, she began, settling at a nearby table with a glass of lemonade. "You were at her shop yesterday, I hear, helping Mr. Harrow." Tom, a lanky youth with a sunburned neck, nodded warily. "I dropped off some flowers. Didn't stay long. Clara was fussing over that clematis. Said it was for a special display." Mr. Harrow was in a mood after muttering about her being too picky. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind seizing on the detail. A special display. How interesting. Did she say what for? Tom shook his head, didn't ask. "We were out by 3:30, like the log says. Had to get to Chipping Cleghorn by 4. His words echoed Harrow's, but his eyes darted to the door, as if eager to escape scrutiny. Miss Marple sipped her lemonade, her thoughts turning to the clematis. A special order suggested intent, perhaps even a lure to the greenhouse. She recalled a St. Mary Mead florist who'd ordered rare bulbs to impress a client, only to find them stolen by a rival. Had Clara's clematis been more than a decoration? She thanked Tom and left the pub, the village now cloaked in twilight. At home, Miss Marple settled by her fire. Her knitting resumed as she pieced together the day's findings. Harrow's delivery placed him at the scene, his muddy tires a match for the greenhouse footprint. The smudged logbook hinted at a doctored alibi, and the locked shed suggested secrets. Yet his motive, a rejected batch of orchids, seemed thin compared to Grayson's heated quarrel or Sophie's inheritance. Lily's stained hands still nagged at her, but Harrow's access to the clematis and his guarded manner made him a figure of interest. She thought of the muddy footprint, size 9, ruling out Sophie but fitting Harrow or Grayson. The vine, cut cleanly, required knowledge of the greenhouse's contents, knowledge Harrow, as supplier, possessed. Yet something in his brusqueness, his quick dismissal of the disagreement, felt rehearsed. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead milkman who'd claimed innocence in a theft, only for his delivery logs to betray him. Logs, she knew, could lie as easily as men. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind drifted to the other suspects. Grayson's roses, Sophie's upset, Lily's tears all wove into the tapestry of Clara's death. But Harrow's shed, its lock glinting in her memory, felt like a loose thread. She resolved to speak with Inspector Craddock about searching it, and perhaps to revisit the greenhouse for clues overlooked in the initial sweep. For now, she set her knitting aside, her eyes gleaming with the quiet determination of one who saw through the shadows of St. Mary Mead's secrets. Chapter 5. The niece's inheritance. The morning mist clung to the lanes of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of cottages and lending an air of quiet mystery to the village. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a light shawl against the chill, walked toward the village hall, where the weekly sewing circle provided a fertile ground for gathering the threads of local gossip. Her knitting bag, as ever, hung from her arm, its gentle weight a reminder of the patterns she wove in her mind. The murder of Clara Thornby had stirred the village into a frenzy of speculation, and Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to Sophie Thornby, Clara's niece from London, whose recent arrival and potential inheritance cast her in a new light. The faint green stain on Sophie's coat, glimpsed during their brief encounter, lingered in Miss Marple's memory, suggesting a connection to the greenhouse and, perhaps, to the fatal clematis vine. The village hall was a modest building, its walls adorned with faded posters from past fetes and jumble sales. Inside, the sewing circle buzzed with chatter, needles flashing as women bent over their work. Miss Marple settled among them, her own needles clicking softly as she began a new row of her pale blue scarf, Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, was in full flow, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "Sophie Thornby's been staying at the Rose and Crown," she said, her eyes bright with the thrill of news. "Came down from London a week ago, all secretive. They say she's to inherit Clara's shop, though I heard she and Clara had words. Yesterday, family, you know, always trouble." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the detail. A family quarrel, coupled with an inheritance, was a potent motive. She recalled a St. Mary Mead cousin who'd visited an elderly aunt, all smiles, only to be caught rifling through her will. "Did anyone see Sophie at the shop?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as mild as the morning mist. Mrs. Bantry, a robust woman with a knack for bluntness, leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale did. Said Sophie left Clara's shop just before 5, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. And I saw her myself at the Rose and Crown later, fidgeting with her coat, as if she couldn't sit still. That girl's got something on her mind, mark my words." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to Sophie's nervous demeanour. The green stain on her coat, possibly from a vine, suggested she'd been in the greenhouse, perhaps handling the very clematis that ended Clara's life. But Sophie's delicate frame, slender hands, slight build seemed ill-suited to the strength required for strangling. Still, Miss Marple knew appearances could deceive. She thanked the ladies and, after finishing her tea, resolved to call on Sophie at the Rose and Crown, the inn, a cosy establishment with low beams and a crackling fire, was quiet in the late morning. Sophie Thornby sat in a corner of the lounge, a cup of coffee untouched before her. She was a pale young woman of 25, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that darted like a startled bird's. Her coat, hung over the chair, bore the faint green smudge Miss Marple had noted, and her fingers twisted a handkerchief in a gesture reminiscent of lily meadows. "Good morning, Miss Thornby," Miss Marple said, approaching with her usual gentle smile. "I'm Jane Marple, a friend of your late aunt's. May I join you?" Sophie's eyes widened, but she nodded, gesturing to the empty chair. "Of course," she said, her voice tinged with a London accent. It's kind of you to call. I'm still in shock about Aunt Clara." Miss Marple settled her knitting bag at her feet. "A dreadful loss," she said softly. "I understand you saw her yesterday. It must have been a comfort to spend time with her." Sophie's fingers tightened on the handkerchief. "I visited around 4, she said. We had tea in her office, talked about family matters. I left about 5:30. She was fine then, working in the greenhouse. I can't believe—" Her voice faltered and she looked away, her eyes glistening. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her gaze steady but kind. "Family matters can be trying," she said. "I heard you and Clara had a disagreement. Nothing serious, I hope." Sophie flushed, her hands stilling. "It was nothing, really. I'd been in a bit of trouble money, you know. Aunt Clara lent me some last year, and I haven't repaid her. She was disappointed, said I needed to sort myself out, but we parted. On good terms, I swear." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the admission. A financial debt, coupled with an inheritance, painted a vivid picture. She recalled a St. Mary Mead nephew who'd begged for loans, only to resent the lender's disapproval. "And you went straight back here after leaving the shop?" she asked. "Yes," Sophie said quickly. "I had dinner in my room, read a bit, went to bed. Mrs. Carter, the landlady, can confirm I was here." Her voice was firm, but her eyes flickered as if guarding a secret. Miss Marple's smile remained gentle. Your coat, she said, glancing at it. That green mark, did you brush against something in the greenhouse? The clematis, perhaps. Sophie's hand flew to the coat, her face paling. Oh, that, I must have leaned against a plant. Aunt Clara was showing me her new vines. It's nothing. Her words tumbled out, too quick, and Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her voice. They spoke a little longer, Miss Marple steering the conversation to Clara's shop and Sophie's plans. Sophie admitted she stood to inherit the business, though she seemed uncertain about keeping it. I'm no florist, she said. I might sell it, pay my debts. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind buzzing with new threads. Outside, she paused by the inn's garden, where a few straggling vines climbed a fence. The green stain on Sophie's coat matched the hue of the clematis, but her slender hands seemed incapable of the force needed to strangle. Yet motive, Miss Marple knew, could drive even the frail to desperate acts. She thought of a St. Mary Mead governess, delicate as a reed, who'd poisoned her employer over a contested will. Sophie's debt, her inheritance, and her nervous demeanor suggested more than she'd admitted. Miss Marple made her way to the police station, where Inspector Craddock was reviewing statements. She shared Sophie's account, mentioning the green stain and the financial strain. She's hiding something, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but certain. Perhaps not murder, but something. Her alibi depends on Mrs. Carter. Have you spoken to her? Craddock nodded, flipping through his notebook. Mrs. Carter says Sophie was in her room by 6, but she's vague on the exact time. Could have slipped out, though it's a short walk to the shop. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A short walk indeed, she said, and that stainage too specific to dismiss. I'd like to see Clara's office. Inspector Sophie mentioned tea. There. Perhaps there's a clue to their conversation. Craddock sighed, accustomed to her requests. All right, Miss Marple, but don't touch anything. They walked to the shop, the village now stirring with midday activity. Inside Clara's office, a cramped room behind the counter, Miss Marple noted a teapot, 2 cups, and a ledger on the desk. The ledger, when opened, showed meticulous records of sales, but a loose page caught her age note in Clara's hand. S. Owes £200, due last month. No mention of forgiveness, only a firm underline. Miss Marple's mind raced. The debt, the inheritance, the stain all pointed to Sophie, yet the footprint in the greenhouse, too large for her small feet, suggested another hand. She thought of Grayson's temper, Harrow's tires, Lily's tears. Each suspect held a piece of the puzzle, but Sophie's secrets, she felt, were closer to the heart of the matter. As she left the shop, the mist lifting to reveal a clear sky, Miss Marple resolved to revisit the greenhouse, to trace the path of that vine and the hands that wielded it. Sophie's delicate frame might not have strangled Clara, but her presence, her motive, wove her into the mystery's fabric. Miss Marple, needles tucked back into her bag, awaited the next stitch in the pattern she was slowly unraveling. Chapter 6. The greenhouse revisited. The midday sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its rays filtering through the ancient elms that lined the village lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, walked with purpose toward Clara Thornby's shop, her knitting bag swinging at her side like a trusted companion. A fine drizzle had begun, misting her spectacles, but she shielded herself with a sturdy umbrella, her mind undeterred by the weather. The greenhouse, scene of Clara's grim end, called her back, its glass walls holding secrets that the police, in their methodical haste, might have overlooked. Sophie's green-stained coat, Grayson's lingering presence, Harrow's muddy tires, and Lily's trembling hands wove a complex tapestry in her thoughts. But Miss Marple knew that the truth often lay in the smallest details. Details like a misplaced petal or a forgotten scrap of paper. The shop, Thornby's Blooms, stood silent, its windows darkened by drawn blinds. A constable stood guard at the door, but he recognized Miss Marple and, with a nod from Inspector Craddock, allowed her to pass. Craddock, already inside, was supervising a young officer sifting through Clara's ledgers. "Back again, Miss Marple," he said, his tone a mix of amusement and resignation. "I suppose you've a hunch about something." "Merely a desire to see things clearly," she replied, her voice as soft as the drizzle outside. "The greenhouse and I take another look. I find that a second glance often reveals what the first misses." Craddock sighed, waving her toward the glass structure at the rear of the shop. "Go on then, but mind the evidence markers. We've already bagged the vine and dusted for prints." Miss Marple stepped into the greenhouse, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading flowers. The workbench where Clara's body had been found was now bare, save for a few scattered tools and a dusting of soil. The muddy footprint, marked by a police tag, remained on the packed earth floor, its size 9 outline stark against the surrounding dirt. Miss Marple knelt, her umbrella propped beside her, and examined the footprint closely. Its edges were crisp, suggesting a recent tread, and the soil matched the muddy paths outside Harrow's nursery. Yet Grayson's estate, too, had muddy grounds, and Lily's hands bore the same dark earth. Her eyes roamed the workbench. Noting the absence of the lilies Lily claimed Clara was arranging. Instead, a single white rose petal, overlooked by the police, clung to a splintered edge of the bench. Miss Marple's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Grayson's roses again, she thought, recalling his claim of buying them for his wife's grave. She tucked the petal into a small envelope from her bag, a habit born of years unravelling village mysteries. A St. Mary Mead baker had once left a crumb of evidencer, literal one that led to his undoing. And Miss Marple knew better than to dismiss such trifles as she straightened. Her gaze fell on a clay pot tucked beneath the workbench, its rim cracked and soil spilling over. Something glinted within a torn scrap of paper wedged in the dirt. With a careful hand, she retrieved it, unfolding it to reveal a few scrawled words in Clara's neat hand. "Pay or else." The ink was smudged, but the threat was clear. Blackmail, Miss Marple thought, her mind racing to a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who'd kept a secret ledger, extorting neighbours until one struck back. She slipped the scrap into her envelope, her thoughts turning to Grayson's heated quarrel and Sophie's unpaid debt. Clara, it seemed, had been more than a florist. She'd been a keeper of secrets. Miss Marple stepped outside, where the drizzle had thickened, and found Craddock waiting. "Anything?" he asked, his notebook at the ready. "A petal and a note," she said, showing him the envelope. "The petal is a rose, not a lily, despite Lily's story. And this," she held up the scrap, "suggests Clara was pressing someone for payment, perhaps not just for flowers." Craddock's brow furrowed as he examined the note. "Blackmail," he said, echoing her thoughts. "That'd give someone a reason to silence her. Grayson's got the money to pay, and Sophie's got debts. Harrow might have resented her rejections. But this feels personal." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the greenhouse's glass walls, streaked with rain. "The footprint bothers me, Inspector. It's too large for Sophie, but Grayson or Harrow could fit. And Lily, she knows this greenhouse better than anyone. That vine wasn't chosen by chance. It was deliberate, cut cleanly with shears. Craddock jotted a note, his expression grim. We'll look into the note. I've got men checking Grayson's boots and Harrow's van. Lily's alibi holds, but it's thin. Her mother says she was home, but she's half deaf and can't swear too. The hour. Miss Marple's needles, now in hand, resumed their soft clicking as she walked back to the village, Craddock's words echoing in her mind. The note, pay or else, suggested Clara had leverage over someone, but who? Grayson's wealth made him a likely target, yet his temper suggested impulsiveness, not the calculation of the vine's use. Sophie's debt pointed to desperation, but her slight frame seemed unequal to the task. Harrow's access to the clematis was damning, but his motive remained murky, and Lily, her tears, her stained hands, could she have harboured a grudge beneath her loyalty? At the village square, Miss Marple paused by the post office, where Miss Hartnell was sweeping the step. "Any news, Miss Marple?" she called, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Only sad thoughts about Clara," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle. "Did you see anyone near her shop yesterday evening, Miss Hartnell? Around 6, perhaps?" Miss Hartnell's broom stilled. "Well, now you mention it, I saw Mr. Grayson by the gate, looking all out of sorts. Didn't go in, just stood there, staring at the greenhouse. And Sophie was at the Rose and Crown later, but I couldn't say when she got there." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind adding Grayson's lingering presence to the puzzle. Mrs. Hale had seen him too, contradicting his claim of being home by 5. She recalled a St. Mary Mead tailor who'd lingered outside a rival's shop, plotting revenge for a lost client. Grayson's roses, the note, the footprint, each piece tightened the net around him. Yet the vine's deliberate use suggested a colder mind. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a rhythmic counterpoint to her thoughts. The drizzle pattered against the windows, and she sipped a cup of tea, her mind weaving the clues into a pattern. The note pointed to blackmail, the petal to Grayson, the footprint to a man's boot. Sophie's stain and Lily's hands kept them in the frame, but Harrow's clematis unlocked shed gnawed at her. She resolved to press Craddock for a search of the shed and to speak with Mrs. Carter at the Rose and Crown about Sophie's movements. The truth, she felt, was like a flower, bud tightly closed, but ready to unfurl under patient scrutiny as the fire crackled. Miss Marple's needles danced, her eyes alight with the quiet thrill of the chase. Clara's death was no random act. It was a design, and she would trace its lines, one delicate stitch at a time. Chapter 7. Whispers of Blackmailer. The late afternoon cast a golden hue over St. Mary Mead, softening the edges of its stone cottages and bathing the village in a deceptive calm. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn close against a faint chill, made her way to the post office, where the hum of village gossip was as reliable as the church clock. Her knitting bag, a constant companion, swung gently at her side, its contents a quiet anchor as her mind sifted through the clues of Clara Thornby's murder. The torn scrap of paper, pay or else, found in the greenhouse, had ignited a spark in her thoughts. Blackmail, that insidious thread woven through so many human tragedies, seemed to coil around Clara's death like the clematis vine itself. Miss Marple's steps were measured, but her eyes gleamed with purpose, for she knew that secrets, once whispered, could unravel even the tightest knots. The post office, a cramped room smelling of wax and ink, was presided over by Miss Hartnell, whose sharp tongue and sharper eyes missed little. She was sorting letters with brisk efficiency when Miss Marple entered, her straw hat slightly tilted from the breeze. "Good afternoon, Miss Hartnell," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a summer rain. "I was hoping you might spare a moment. The village is all atwitter about poor Clara." Miss Hartnell's hands paused, her face alight with the prospect of sharing news. "Atwitter's the word, Miss Marple. Strangled with a vine can, you imagine. And Clara, of all people, so particular about her flowers. I heard she kept a private ledger, you know, not just for sales. Mrs. Price says it was full of secrets, though I can't say what kind." Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their gentle clicking. "A ledger," she said, her tone one of mild curiosity. "How intriguing. Did Clara ever mention such a thing to you?" "Not to me directly," Miss Hartnell admitted, leaning forward, "but last month I saw her at the shop, scribbling in a little book, all secretive-like. Locked it in her desk when she saw me coming. I thought nothing of it then, but now. Well, it makes you wonder." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A private ledger suggested more than business records. It hinted at leverage, perhaps the source of the pay or else note. She recalled a St. Mary Mead seamstress who'd kept a diary of her clients' indiscretions, using it to extract small favors until one client silenced her with a stolen brooch. "Did anyone else visit Clara that day?" she asked, her eyes on her knitting. Miss Hartnell's lips pursed. "Mr. Grayson was there, as usual, buying his roses. And Sophie Thornbushy's been in and out since she arrived from London. Looked nervous, if you ask me. Oh, and Mr. Harrow delivered flowers, but he's always quick about it." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, the village now settling into the hush of late afternoon. The ledger, if it existed, was a key, and she resolved to speak with Inspector Craddock about searching Clara's desk. She made her way to the police station, where Craddock was reviewing a stack of reports, his face etched with the strain of a case growing more tangled by the hour. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up with a wry smile, "I should have known. You'd be back. Found another petal." "Not this time," she replied, settling into a chair. "But I've heard talk of a private ledger Clara kept, possibly locked in her desk. Given the note pay, or else, it might shed light on her dealings, perhaps with Mr. Grayson, or even Sophie." Craddock's brow furrowed, and he reached for his notebook. "A ledger. We searched the shop, but the desk was locked, and we hadn't got to it yet. If Clara was blackmailing someone, that'd explain a lot." He called for a constable, issuing orders to retrieve the desk key from Clara's cottage and search the office thoroughly. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she waited, her thoughts turning to the suspects. Grayson's quarrel over bills, Sophie's unpaid debt, Harrow's rejected orchids, Lily's stained hands itch, held a motive. But the ledger could point to the one who snapped. She recalled a St. Mary Mead vicar whose private notes, discovered after his death, revealed a parishioner's affair, sparking a village scandal. Clara's ledger, if it held similar secrets, might name her killer. The constable returned within, the hour bearing a small, leather-bound diary, its lock broken open. Craddock opened it, his eyes scanning the pages as Miss Marple leaned forward, her spectacles glinting. The diary was a meticulous record, not of flower sales, but of payment sums, far exceeding the cost of bouquets. Grayson's name appeared repeatedly, with entries like a G, £50, June 10th, and a G, silence, £75, July 1st. Other names were absent. but cryptic notes hinted at more. SOOs, no payment yet, and H warned, no more delays. Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile of recognition. Blackmail, Inspector, she said softly. Clara was pressing Mr. Grayson, and possibly Sophie or Harrow. These sums, they're not for roses. Craddock nodded, his expression grim. Grayson's got the money to pay, but he's not the patient sort, and Sophie, her debts might have made her desperate. Harrow's business could have suffered if Clara switched suppliers. He closed the diary, tucking it into an evidence bag. We'll question Grayson again, and Sophie. This changes things. Miss Marple rose, her mind already weaving the new threads into the pattern. Might I suggest checking Grayson's accounts, she said. If he was paying Clara, there'll be withdrawals, and Sophie, her movements after 5:30 need clarifying. Mrs. Carter's memory is vague at best. Craddock jotted a note, his respect for her insights evident despite his gruff demeanor. You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. I'll have my men look into it. Anything else? Only a thought, she said, adjusting her shawl. The clematis violet was special to Clara, ordered through Harrow. Whoever chose it knew its strength, and where to find it. That suggests intimacy with the greenhouse saw, with Clara's habits. As she left the station, the village now cloaked in the soft grey of early evening. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Grayson's payments. The diary confirmed he was being bled, likely for a secret Clara had uncovered, perhaps an indiscretion, a gambling debt, or something darker. She recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant who'd paid a neighbour to keep quiet about a forged cheque, only to end the arrangement with a desperate act. Grayson's temper, his lingering near the shop, made him a prime suspect, yet the muddy footprint and the vine's deliberate cut pointed to a colder calculation. She paused at the village green, where a few late stragglers exchanged whispers about the murder. Mrs. Hale, passing with a basket of laundry, stopped to share a tidbit. I saw Grayson near the shop again last night, she said, her voice low. Not at 6, but later, near 7. He was by the gate, looking at the greenhouse like he'd seen a ghost. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind adding this to the growing puzzle. Grayson's repeated presence contradicted his alibi further, but the footprint size 9, muddy, could also fit Harrow. Sophie's green stain and Lily's knowledge of the greenhouse kept them in the frame, but the diary tilted the balance toward Grayson. She resolved to visit his estate again, to probe his secrets with the gentle insistence that had unravelled so many village mysteries. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as the evening deepened. The diary's entries, the note's threat, the white rose petal all pointed to a web of extortion with Clara at its centre. Grayson's wealth made him vulnerable, but his anger suggested he'd reached a breaking point. Yet the vine, the footprint, and the greenhouse's intimacy hinted at another hand, perhaps working in concert. Miss Marple's needles danced, her eyes alight with the quiet certainty that the truth, like a hidden bloom, was beginning to emerge from the shadows. Of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 8. The vines clothed the evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, the stars beginning to prick through the velvet sky as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the local nursery. A short walk beyond the village's heart, her shawl was drawn tightly about her shoulders, and her knitting bag, ever present, swung lightly with each step. The discovery of Clara Thornby's diary, with its damning record of payments and veiled threats, had sharpened Miss Marple's focus on the clematis vine, the murder weapon itself, chosen with chilling precision. Its rarity, supplied by Ernest Harrow, suggested a knowledge of Clara's greenhouse that could not be dismissed. Miss Marple's mind, as keen as the shears that had cut the fatal vine, was alive with the threads of motive and opportunity, each suspector not to be untangled. The nursery, a patchwork of greenhouses and flower beds, glowed faintly under the moonlight, its rows of blooms silent witnesses to the village's tragedy. Miss Marple found Mr. Dawson, the nursery's owner, tending to a tray of seedlings under a lantern's soft light. He was a stooped man with soil-stained hands, his face creased with years of tending fragile things. "Miss Marple," he greeted, wiping his brow. "Come about, Clara, I reckon." "Terrible business, indeed," she replied, her voice gentle but probing. "I was curious about the clematis vine Clara ordered. It's quite distinctive, I understand." Dawson nodded, leading her to a trellis where the vine climbed in lush coils. "Aye, it's a rare sort clematis for Talbot, strong as rope and not common round here. Clara ordered it special, said it was for a display, though she was particular about its placement in the greenhouse. Mr. Harrow delivered it last month, and I supplied him with the stock." Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their soft clicking as she studied the vine. Its thick, fibrous strands matched the murder weapon perfectly, its leaves glossy even in the dim light. "And was it widely known, this order?" she asked. "Did others at the shop handle it?" Dawson scratched his chin. "Lily knew, of course. She tended the greenhouse like it was her own. Sophie was there when it arrived, asking questions about it. And Grayson, well, he was always poking about, buying his roses. Couldn't say who else might have noticed." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "The vine's rarity narrowed the circle of those who knew its strength, Lily, with her intimate knowledge of the greenhouse. Sophie, with her curious questions, Harrow, who supplied it, and Grayson, whose frequent visits gave him access. She recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener who'd used a rare plant to poison a rival, its obscurity masking his intent until a single leaf betrayed him. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson," she said, her mind already weaving the new clue into the pattern. She walked back to the village, the night air cool against her face. The clematis, a special order, was no random choice. It required intent, someone who knew its location and its lethal potential. At the police station, she found Inspector Craddock poring over the diary, his face etched with frustration. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up, "we've checked Grayson's account's large withdrawals, cash, matching the diary's entries. He was paying Clara all right, but he swears it was just for flowers." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her needles resuming their rhythm. "And yet the sums are too high for roses," she said softly. "The diary suggests blackmail, and the clematis suggests planning. I've just spoken with Mr. Dawson at the nursery. That vine was a special order, known to Lily, Sophie, Harrow, and possibly Grayson. Whoever used it knew exactly what they were doing." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Harrow's the supplier, and his tires match the footprint. But Grayson's payments give him a stronger motive. Sophie's debts are a factor, but her psyche couldn't have overpowered Clara. And Lily, her alibi's thin, but she's no killer, surely." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile. "People surprise us, Inspector. I recall a St. Mary Mead made all tears and loyalty, who stole her mistress's jewels to settle a debt. Lily's hands, stained with greenhouse soil, place her at the scene. Sophie's coat, marked with clematis, suggests she handled the vine. Harrow's shed, locked and scented with the same plant, hides something, and Grayson his temper and his secrets make him dangerous. Craddock jotted a note, his expression grim. We searched Harrow's shed, nothing but tools and pesticides, though we found clematis cuttings in a bin. Could have been from the delivery. Grayson's boots are being checked, but Mrs. Finch swears he was home by 6, though she's not certain of the time. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the footprint, size 9, too large for Sophie, but fitting for Grayson or Harrow. Lily's small frame made her an unlikely strangler, yet her knowledge of the greenhouse was unmatched. The vine, the diary, the petal, each clue pointed to a calculated act, not a crime of passion. She recalled a St. Mary Mead farmerhood, planned a theft with such precision that only a stray button revealed him. The clematis, she felt, was the button in this case. "Inspector," she said, her voice calm but firm, "might I suggest a closer look at the greenhouse's tools? The shears used to cut the vine, they may bear marks, perhaps fingerprints, and Sophie's coat, has it been examined?" Craddock raised an eyebrow. "The coat's with the lab, but it's just a stain, they say. The shears were clean, no prints. The killer was careful, but not invisible," Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing. "The vine was cut cleanly, not torn. That takes strength and intent. And the diary, have you found other names beyond Grayson's?" Craddock shook his head. "Just initials S and H, likely Sophie and Harrow, but nothing concrete. We're pulling Sophie in again tomorrow, and Grayson. Harrow's alibi holds, but that smudged logbook bothers me." Miss Marple rose, adjusting her shawl. "A smudged logbook is a lie in ink," she said, "and a special vine is a choice, not a chance. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Carter at the Rose and Crown about Sophie's movements, and perhaps another visit to Grayson's estate. His boots may tell a tale." As she stepped into the night, the village silent save for the distant hoot of an owl, Miss Marple's mind buzzed with the puzzle's pieces. The clematis, ordered by Clara, known to her suspects, was the murder's signature. Grayson's payments suggested a secret worth killing for, but the footprint and the vines cut pointed to a planner Harrow, perhaps, or even Lily, masking her role behind tears. Sophie's stain kept her in the frame, but her motive felt less immediate. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who'd orchestrated a theft with such cunning that only a misplaced glove unravelled her. The vine, she thought, was Clara's glove at her cottage. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as the night deepened. The diary's entries, the clematis's rarity, the muddy footprint all wove a pattern of deceit and desperation. She resolved to press Craddock for a deeper search of Harrow's shed and to probe Grayson's secrets further. The truth, she felt, was like a rare bloom hidden, but ready to be plucked by a patient hand. Chapter 9. The customer's secret. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through a veil of clouds that hinted at rain. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly folded over her arm, set out for Arthur Grayson's estate, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side. The discovery of Clara Thornby's diary, with its record of Grayson's payments, had cast a shadow over the widower, his frequent roses and heated quarrel with Clara suggesting a secret worth killing for. The clematis vine, the muddy footprint, and the cryptic pay or else note wove a tightening net. But Miss Marple knew that secrets, like weeds, required careful uprooting. Her steps were steady, her mind as sharp as the shears that had severed the fatal vine. ready to probe Grayson's defenses with the gentle persistence that had unraveled so many village mysteries. The Grayson estate loomed at the village's edge, its Georgian facade grand but weathered, its gardens overgrown with neglect. Miss Marple rang the bell, and Mrs. Finch, the Dior housekeeper, admitted her with a grudging nod. "Mr. Grayson's in the drawing-room," she said, her tone clipped. "He's not himself today, what with the police poking about." "I shan't take long," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming as she followed Mrs. Finch through a hall lined with faded portraits. The drawing-room was heavy with the scent of old leather and wax, its windows half-shuttered against the morning light. Arthur Grayson stood by a fireplace, a glass of brandy in hand despite the early hour, his florid face etched with strain. His broad shoulders, capable of wielding a vine, tensed as he saw her. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but civil. "I've had enough of questions from that inspector. What do you want?" "Only a moment of your time," she said, settling into a velvet chair, her knitting bag at her feet. Her needles emerged, their soft clicking a counterpoint to the crackle of the fire. "I understand you and Clara had a disagreement over bills. It must have been trying, with your regular purchases of roses." Grayson's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the glass. "She was overcharging me," he said, his tone sharp. "Every week, those roses cost more. I told her it was robbery, but I always paid. I wasn't at the shop after 4, no matter what Mrs. Hale says." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "Mrs. Hale saw you near the shop at 6, and again, later, near 7. It's curious, don't you think, that you were there so late when you claimed to have been here?" Grayson's face reddened, and he took a swig of brandy. "Mrs. Hale's a nosy old bat," he snapped. "I was home, having dinner. Mrs. Finch can tell you. I had no reason to go back." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern. "And the payments in Clara's diarisms far beyond the cost of roses. Were they truly for flowers, Mr. Grayson?" Her voice was soft, but the question cut like a blade. Grayson's hand trembled, the brandy sloshing in his glass. He set it down, his eyes darting to the window. She knew things," he said at last, his voice low. "About my business dealings. Gambling debts. Nothing criminal, but enough to ruin my name in this village. She heard me talking to a creditor at the shop months ago, and started asking for money to keep quiet. I paid her £50, £75 at a time. But I didn't kill her, I swear." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind cataloguing his confession. Gambling debts, a stain on a man of his standing, were motive enough for Blackmailer. For murder, she recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant who'd paid to silence a rumour of insolvency, only to lash out when the demands grew too heavy. "And the last payment?" she asked. "When was it?" "Last week," Grayson said, his voice hoarse. "She wanted another £100. I told her it was the last, that I'd had enough. We argued, yes, but I left her alive. I didn't touch that vine." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to his hands, broad and strong, capable of knotting a vine with force. She noted his polished shoes, pristine as ever, but recalled the muddy paths of his estate. "Your boots, Mr. Grayson," she said, her tone mild. "Do you keep them in the house?" He frowned, caught off guard. "In the shed, out back. Why?" "Only a thought," she said, rising. "The police may wish to see them." "Thank you for your candour, Mr. Grayson." She left him standing by the fire, his face a mask of unease, and stepped into the drizzle that had begun to fall outside. Miss Marple paused by the estate's shed, a weathered structure half hidden by overgrown laurels. Its door was unlocked, and a quick glance revealed a pair of muddy boots, size 9, their soles caked with soil matching the greenhouse's footprint. She made no move to touch them, knowing Craddock's men would need to see them undisturbed. Her mind raced, the boots a damning link, yet Grayson's confession of blackmail felt too raw to be a lie. She recalled a St. Mary Mead farmer who'd confessed to a lesser crime to hide a greater one. Could Grayson be playing a similar game? She made her way to the police station, where Inspector Craddock was reviewing a report from the lab. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his tone weary but welcoming. "Just got word on Sophie's coat. The stains clematis sap, but no prints on the vine itself. The shears were wiped clean." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her needles clicking softly. "And Grayson's boots?" she asked. "I saw a pair in his shed, muddy and size 9. They may match the footprint." Craddock's eyes lit up, and he called for a constable to retrieve them. "If they match, he's in trouble," he said. "His withdrawals line up with the diary, and now this. But he's sticking to his story. Home by 5. Dinner with Mrs. Finch." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Mrs. Finch's memory is vague, and Grayson's temper is not. He admitted to paying Clara to keep quiet about gambling debts. Blackmail is a powerful motive, Inspector, but the vine's use suggests planning, not rage. Someone knew its strength, its place in the greenhouse." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. Harrows, still a possibility. His tires, his access to the vine. Sophie's coat keeps her in the frame, but her size doesn't fit the strength needed. Lily's hands are dirty, but her mother swears she was home. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning to the greenhouse's intimacy. "The vine was no accident," she said. "Lily knows the greenhouse best, but Grayson's payments give him the strongest reason to act. Sophie's debts are pressing, but her frame seems to frail. Harrow's shed, did you find anything more?" "Nothing but cuttings," Craddock said, "but we're checking his logbook again. That smudge bothers me." Miss Marple rose, adjusting her shawl. "A smudge is a shadow of a lie," she said, "and Grayson's boots may cast a longer one. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Carter at the Rose and Crown again to pin down Sophie's movements. And perhaps a word with Lily. She may know more about Clara's habits than she's let on." As she stepped into the drizzle, the village settling into its evening hush, Miss Marple's thoughts wove a tighter pattern. Grayson's confession, the muddy boots, the diary's entries all pointed to a man pushed to the edge by demands. Yet the vine, the footprint, and the greenhouse's secrets suggested a colder hand. Perhaps Lily's or Harrow's. Sophie's stain lingered, a faint but persistent clue. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who'd hidden her guilt behind a tearful confession, only to be undone by a single thread. Grayson, she felt, was close to breaking, but the truth remained just out of reach, waiting for her patient hand to pluck it from the shadows. Chapter 10. The Final Thread. The soft glow of twilight settled over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village's quiet lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl wrapped snugly against the evening chill, stood outside Clara Thornby's shop. Thornby's blooms, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side. The drizzle had ceased, leaving the air fresh and heavy with the scent of damp earth. The clues of Clara's murder, the clematis vine, the muddy footprint, the blackmailing diary, and Grayson's damning confession had woven an intricate web. in Miss Marple's mind, and she felt the moment had come to draw the threads together. With Inspector Craddock's reluctant agreement, she had arranged for the suspects Arthur, Grayson, Lily Meadows, Ernest Harrow, and Sophie Thornby to gather at the shop, a tactic she had employed in past village mysteries to coax truth from tension. Her needles, tucked in her bag, awaited the final stitches of the case. The shop's interior was dim, its counters bare save for a few wilting blooms. The greenhouse loomed at the back, its glass walls glinting faintly under the electric lights. Craddock had ordered switched on. The suspects arrived one by one, their faces a study in unease. Lily, her hands clasped tightly, eyes red from crying. Harrow, wiry and guarded, his gaze darting to the door. Sophie, pale and fidgeting with her handkerchief. And Grayson, his broad frame rigid, his florid face set in a scowl. Craddock stood by the counter, his notebook ready, while Miss Marple took a seat near the greenhouse door, her presence as unassuming as a shadow. "Thank you for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but clear, carrying the authority of one who saw through facades. Clara Thornby's death was no accident, but a calculated act, woven from secrets she held too tightly. Her diary, found in this very shop, tells a tale of blackmail payments demanded for silence, secrets that drove someone to murder. Lily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Sophie's eyes widened, and Harrow shifted uncomfortably. Grayson's scowl deepened, but he said nothing, his fingers clenching the arm of his chair. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, missed none of it. She continued, her tone measured. "Clara's diary names Mr. Grayson, with payments far beyond the cost of Rose's £50, £75, sums to keep his gambling debts hidden. A heavy burden, Mr. Grayson, for a man of pride." Grayson's face reddened, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. "And Sophie," Miss Marple said, turning to the niece, "your debt to Clara, £200 unpaid, is noted too, with a warning to settle or face consequences. An inheritance might have eased that burden, might it not?" Sophie's handkerchief twisted tighter, her lips parting but no words coming. "Harrow," Miss Marple went on, her gaze steady, "your rejected orchids cost you dearly, and Clara's threat to switch suppliers stung. Your tires matched the muddy footprint in the greenhouse, and the clematis vine, your special delivery, was the weapon." Harrow's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. "And Lily," she said softly, "your hands, stained with greenhouse soil, show your intimacy with this place. You knew where the clematis grew, how strong it was. Your tears are real, but loyalty can hide darker truths." Lily sobbed, shaking her head. "I loved Clara. I'd never hurt her." Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm but firm. "The truth lies in the details. A white rose petal, found where Lily should have been. A muddy footprint, size 9. Too large for Sophie, but fitting for Mr. Grayson or Mr. Harrow. A note, pay or else, pointing to blackmail. And the vine, cut cleanly, chosen with care. Someone planned this, someone who knew Clara's habits. And her secrets." She turned to Grayson, her eyes piercing. "Mr. Grayson, you admitted paying Clara to keep your debts quiet. You were seen near the shop at 6, and again at 7, despite your claim of being home. Your boots, found muddy in your shed, matched the greenhouse footprint, and the diary's entries, AG, silence, show Clara's hold over you." Grayson lurched to his feet, his voice a roar. "She was bleeding me dry." I paid her, yes. But I didn't kill her. I went to the shop to argue, to end it, but she was alive when I left. Miss Marple's needles, now in hand, clicked softly. And yet, Mr. Grayson, you didn't end it with words. The boots, the footprint, the vine, they tell a different story. You went to the greenhouse at 6, argued again, and in a rage, you grabbed the clematis, knowing its strength from your visits. You strangled her, thinking it would look like an accident, and fled, leaving your footprint in haste. Grayson's face crumpled, his hands trembling. I didn't mean to kill her, he whispered, sinking back into his chair. She laughed at me, said she'd tell everyone about my debts. I grabbed the vine, it was there, on the workbench. I just wanted to scare her, but she fought, and it was over before I knew it. The room fell silent, save for Lily's soft sobs and the faint creak of Harrow's chair. Sophie stared at Grayson, her handkerchief forgotten, while Harrow's eyes narrowed, relief flickering across his face. Craddock stepped forward, his voice steady. Arthur Grayson, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara Thornby. As the constable led Grayson away, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the greenhouse door. The muddy footprint, the rose petal, the diary's entries all had pointed to Grayson. His temper and desperation unraveling under Clara's pressure. Lily's tears, Sophie's debts, and Harrow's tires had been distractions, their secrets real but not lethal. She recalled a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who'd confessed to theft under similar pressure, his guilt laid bare by a single misplaced clue. Miss Marple rose, adjusting her shawl. People are predictable, she said softly to Craddock, but their breaking points are not. Clara's greed wove her own noose. Craddock nodded, tucking his notebook away. You've done it again, Miss Marple. That footprint and the diary, they clinched it. She smiled faintly, her needle still in hand. Details, Inspector. They always tell the tale. As she stepped into the twilight, the village quiet but for the rustle of leaves, Miss Marple felt the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, its threads neatly tied. Chapter 11. The Confession. The twilight had deepened into a velvet night over St. Mary Mead, the village's lights twinkling like scattered stars against the dark. Miss Jane Marple stood outside Thornby's blooms, her shawl drawn close against the evening chill, her knitting bag resting at her feet. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of roses from the shop's untended displays. Inside, the drama of Arthur Grayson's confession had left a palpable tension. The suspects' faces etched with shock and relief as Inspector Craddock's constable led Grayson away in handcuffs. The clematis vine, the muddy footprint, the damning diary, and Grayson's own words had woven the final threads of Clara Thornby's murder. Yet Miss Marple's mind lingered on the scene, ensuring no detail had been overlooked. Her gentle demeanor belied the sharp clarity that had, once again, unraveled a village tragedy. Inside the shop, Lily Meadows sat slumped on a stool, her face buried in her hands, tears streaming silently. Sophie Thornby stood by the counter, her handkerchief crumpled, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ernest Harrow leaned against the greenhouse door, his wiry frame taut but his expression softened, as if a weight had lifted. Craddock, his notebook tucked away, was giving instructions to the constable, his voice low but firm. Miss Marple, her presence as unobtrusive as ever, watched them all, her eyes catching the subtle shifts in their postures, grief, fear, and relief mingling like petals in the wind. She stepped forward, her voice soft but carrying the quiet authority of truth. "It's a sad business," she said, addressing the room. "Clara's death was no accident, but a consequence of secrets held too tightly. Mr. Grayson's confession confirms what the clues suggested. A man pushed beyond endurance by demands he could no longer meet. Lily looked up, her voice trembling. "I can't believe it. Clara, she was so kind to me. How could he?" Her hands, still stained with greenhouse soil, twisted together, and Miss Marple noted the genuine anguish in her eyes. She recalled a St. Mary Mead maidhood wept for her mistress, only to be innocent of the theft that followed. Lily's tears, she felt, were unfeigned, her role in the drama one of sorrow, not guilt. Sophie's voice broke the silence, her tone brittle. "Aunt Clara never told me about blackmail. I knew she was disappointed about my debts, but this..." Her pale face flushed, and Miss Marple saw the flicker of guilt not for murder, but for the strain she'd placed on her aunt, a St. Mary Mead cousin, burdened by loans, had once borne a similar shame, though it led to no crime. Harrow cleared his throat, his guarded demeanour easing. She was tough on business, Clara was. Those orchids she didn't need to make such a fuss. But I'd no reason to hurt her. My tires might have matched, but I was long gone by 6. His words were steady, and Miss Marple nodded, her mind dismissing his shed and smudged logbook as mere distractions in the face of Grayson's guilt. Craddock approached, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Miss Marple, you've a way of cutting through the fog," he said. Grayson's boots matched the footprint, and the lab confirmed the muds from the shop's path. His withdrawals line up with the diary, and that confession, well, it's airtight. He's being booked now. Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile of satisfaction. The details, Inspector, always tell the tale. The rose petal, the footprint, the diary's entries, they pointed to Mr. Grayson, but it was his own words that sealed it. He meant to scare her, he said, but desperation has a way of turning intent into tragedy. She turned to the greenhouse, its glass walls now dark, and recalled the scene. Clara's body, the vine knotted tightly, the scattered petals. Grayson's confession had clarified the sequence. He'd argued with Clara at 6, grabbed the clematis in a rage, and strangled her when she fought back. The muddy footprint, left in his haste, matched his boots, and the diary's record of his payments provided the motive. Lily's tears, Sophie's stain, and Harrow's tires had been red herrings, their secrets real but not deadly. Miss Marple addressed the group, her voice gentle but firm. Clara's curiosity was her undoing. She saw secrets as leverage, not danger, and Mr. Grayson, pressed by her demands, saw no other way out. The vine was a weapon of opportunity, but chosen with the knowledge of its strength and knowledge he gained from his many visits. Lily sobbed again, and Sophie reached out, her hand hesitant. "I should have paid her back," Sophie whispered. "If I had, maybe." Her voice trailed off, and Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Regret changes nothing," she said. Clara's choices were her own, as were Mr. Grayson's. "You mustn't blame yourself." She recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who'd blamed herself for a nephew's crime, only to find peace in letting go. Sophie's debts, she felt, would haunt her, but not as a murderer. Harrow stepped forward, his tone gruff but sincere. "I'm glad it's over. Clara was tough, but she didn't deserve this. I'll keep supplying the shop, if Lily takes it on." He glanced at the girl, who nodded faintly, her grief tempered by purpose. Craddock escorted the suspects out, leaving Miss Marple alone in the shop. She lingered by the greenhouse, her eyes tracing the workbench where the rose petal had lain. The mystery was solved, the threads tied, yet a faint unease lingered, not doubt, but the weight of human frailty. She recalled a St. Mary Mead grocer who'd confessed to arson, his guilt laid bare by a single matchstick. Grayson's boots, his confession, were the matchsticks here, igniting the truth as she stepped into the night, the village silent save. For the rustle of leaves, Miss Marple felt the calm of resolution. People are so predictable, she murmured, thinking of Janet, her maid, who'd be waiting with tea and questions. The truth had emerged, as it always did, from the quiet details: a petal, a footprint, a diary scrawl. She adjusted her shawl and walked home, her knitting bag swinging, ready for the village's next secret to unravel. Chapter 12. The quiet village. The dawn broke gently over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft pinks and golds, as if to soothe the wounds of recent tragedy. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, her knitting needles clicking with their familiar rhythm, a pale blue scarf lengthening in her lap. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of dew-kissed grass, and the village seemed to exhale, its rhythm restored after the storm of Clara Thornby's murder. Arthur Grayson's confession had closed the case. His muddy boots and blackmail payments, the final threads in a tapestry Miss Marple had patiently unravelled. Yet, as she sipped her morning tea, her sharp eyes gazed beyond the lace curtains, reflecting on the human frailties that had woven such a dark design. The village stirred slowly, its routines reclaiming the day. At Thornby's Blooms, now under Lily Meadow's tentative care, the shop's windows gleamed with fresh displays of marigolds and daisies, a sign of life returning. Lily, her grief softened by purpose, had taken on the business, her hands stained with suspicion now, tending flowers with renewed devotion. Miss Marple had seen her that morning, arranging a bouquet for the vicar's wife, her movements steady despite the shadows in her eyes. A St. Mary Mead apprentice, years ago, had similarly rebuilt her life after a master's betrayal, and Miss Marple felt a quiet hope for Lily's future. Sophie Thornby, no longer a suspect but still burdened by her debts, had decided to sell the shop to Lily, using the proceeds to settle her obligations in London. Miss Marple had met her at the Rose and Crown the previous evening, where Sophie's pale face bore a mix of relief and regret. "I wish I'd been better to Aunt Clara," she'd said, her voice low. "I didn't know about her schemes, but I should have paid her back." Miss Marple had offered gentle words, recalling a St. Mary Mead niece who'd found redemption after a family rift. Sophie's green-stained coat, once a clue, was now merely a reminder of a moment in the greenhouse, innocent but telling. Ernest Harrow, cleared of suspicion, had resumed his deliveries, his van rattling through the village with its usual efficiency. The smudge in his logbook, the clematis cuttings in his shed, had proven mere distractions, his resentment over Clara's rejected orchids not deep enough for murder. Miss Marple had passed his nursery that morning, noting his brisk manner as he loaded crates. A St. Mary Mead farmer, once suspected of theft, had similarly returned to his fields, his innocence a quiet vindication. Harrow's tires, though muddy, had led nowhere, and Miss Marple dismissed them with a nod to human complexity. At her cottage, Miss Marple set her knitting aside as Janet, her maid, bustled in with a tray of scones and a fresh pot of tea. "The village is talking of nothing but Mr. Grayson," Janet said, her eyes wide. "Locked up in the county jail, they say, and not a soul surprised. Who'd have thought he'd strangle poor Clara over a few pounds?" "Not a few pounds, Janet," Miss Marple corrected gently, pouring tea. A secret pressed too hard. Clara's diary showed her greed, and Mr. Grayson's pride could bear it no longer. Blackmail is a dangerous game, and the clematis vine was its final move. Janet shivered, settling across from her. That vine gives me the creeps, miss. To think it was growing there, all innocent, until he used it. Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile. Innocent things can become weapons, Janet, when the heart is desperate. I recall a St. Mary Mead seamstress who used a simple needle to exact her revenge not with blood, but with ruin. Mr. Grayson chose the vine because he knew it from his many visits to Clara's shop. She sipped her tea, her mind drifting to the greenhouse, the muddy footprint, the white rose petal, the diary's scrawl. Each clue had pointed to Grayson, his temper and desperation laid bare by Clara's demands. The vine, a special order, had been his tool, its strength known from his frequent purchases. Lily's tears, Sophie's debts, Heros, Tiazol had woven a distracting pattern, but Miss Marple's patient eye had seen through to the truth. The village, she knew, would move on. The Blue Boar would hum with gossip, Mrs. Price would recount the tale at the sewing circle, and Miss Hartnell would speculate at the post office. But Clara's shop, now Lilies, would bloom again, its colours a quiet defiance of tragedy. Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead garden, replanted after a storm, its roots stronger for the upheaval. Human nature, she reflected, was much the same, fragile, flawed, but enduring. As the morning brightened, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needle's rhythm a counterpoint to her thoughts. The case was closed, the killer confessed, yet the villagers' secrets would never fully sleep. Another mystery, she knew, would soon stir St. Mary Mead's calm, and she would be ready. Her quiet observations, sharper than any blade. For now, she savoured the peace, her tea warm, her scarf growing, and the villager's heartbeat steady beneath the weight of its stories.